Newark, New Jersey, 1978. 15-year-old Whitney Houston stood in a backstage corridor of a concert venue, trying very hard not to look as terrified as she felt. Her mother, Cissy Houston, one of the most respected gospel and background vocalists in America, was somewhere nearby talking to people she knew. They were at an Ella Fitzgerald concert. Cissy had brought Whitney along, the way she sometimes brought her daughter into the musical world she inhabited professionally. Whitney had no idea that tonight would become one of the most important nights of her life. This is the story of what happened when Cissy Houston asked Ella Fitzgerald to listen to her daughter sing, of a 60-year-old legend hearing something in a teenager's voice that she recognized immediately, of the single sentence Ella spoke afterward, 7 words that Whitney Houston would carry for the rest of her career, return to in moments of doubt, and eventually credit as one of the most important pieces of guidance she ever received. 7 words, one legendary voice, one teenager who would become a legend herself. Cissy Houston was not an ordinary music industry figure. She had been the lead singer of the Sweet Inspirations, one of the most in-demand background vocal groups of the 1960s. The Sweet Inspirations had sung backup for Elvis Presley, Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, and countless others. Cissy's voice was known throughout the industry for its power, its gospel roots, its emotional authenticity. But Cissy was also a mother who was watching her daughter develop something extraordinary. Whitney, at 15, was already singing in the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, where Cissy directed the choir. Those who heard her knew something was different. The voice had a quality that went beyond talent, a clarity, a power, an emotional directness that seemed almost unfair in someone so young. Cissy had been careful with Whitney's development. The music industry was not kind to young performers, especially young black female performers. She'd seen too many careers destroyed by being pushed too fast, by being signed too young, by being turned into a product before becoming an artist. She was protective. But she was also practical. Whitney needed mentorship, not just vocal instruction, though she was receiving that. She needed to understand what it meant to have a voice, what responsibilities came with it, what demands it placed on you, what it required to sustain a serious career over decades rather than years. Cissy thought about who could convey that, who had done it the right way for the longest time with the most integrity. Ella Fitzgerald, 60 years old in 1978, still performing, still recording, still commanding stages with the authority of someone who had been the best at what she did since the 1930s. Cissy and Ella weren't close friends, but they were professional acquaintances who moved in overlapping worlds. Gospel and jazz weren't the same world, but they touched. They'd crossed paths at industry events, at recording studios, at concerts where the same musicians moved between different genres. When Ella had a concert in Newark in 1978, Cissy made sure to attend. She was there primarily to support a colleague, to enjoy an evening of extraordinary music, but she'd brought Whitney. The concert itself was everything. Ella at 60, her voice changed from the crystalline instrument of her 30s and 40s, but deeper now, more richly textured, carrying decades of experience in every phrase. She performed for 2 hours, and the audience, including 15-year-old Whitney, who sat forward in her seat the entire time, was completely absorbed. Afterward, Cissy used her industry connections to gain backstage access. This was normal for someone of Cissy's standing. She knew people, people knew her, and the backstage world of music was smaller and more interconnected than it appeared from outside. Ella was in her dressing room, surrounded by the usual post-concert activity. Her manager, musicians who'd performed with her, venue staff, a few industry contacts. Not chaotic, but busy. Cissy was greeted warmly. Ella and Cissy exchanged the particular warmth of 2 professional black women in an industry that had often treated them as less than they were. A mutual recognition and respect. Then Ella noticed the teenager standing slightly behind Cissy, taking everything in with wide eyes. "Who's this?" Ella asked. "My daughter," Cissy said. "Whitney, she sings." There was a pause. Ella looked at Whitney, this tall, thin 15-year-old with the wide eyes and the nervous posture of someone who very much wanted to be invisible. "Whitney," Ella said, not a question, just acknowledging the name. "Yes, ma'am," Whitney said. Her voice was quiet, barely a whisper. Ella smiled at the formality. "You don't have to ma'am me, I'm not that old." "A beat. What do you sing?" "Gospel mostly, some pop, whatever my mother teaches me." "Gospel is the foundation," Ella said. "Everything else is built on gospel." Whitney nodded. She'd heard this before. Her Mother said it, the church elders said it, but hearing it from Ella Fitzgerald made it resonate differently. Ella studied the girl for a moment. There was something in the way she held herself, something about the throat, the chest, the way breath moved through her. Decades of working with vocalists had given Ella an almost physical sense for voices. She could sometimes see the instrument before she heard it. "Sing something," Ella said simply. The room went quieter. The post-concert activity didn't stop entirely, but several people nearby turned to look. Whitney froze. I don't have anything prepared. Nobody needs preparation for singing," Ella said. "Sing what you know." Whitney looked at her mother. Cissy's expression said, "You're fine, go ahead." Whitney took a breath. She was terrified. Ella Fitzgerald was 3 feet away. Watching her, the woman she'd just watched command a stage for 2 hours was waiting for her to sing. Whitney opened her mouth and sang the first thing that came to her, a gospel song she'd known since childhood, something from the New Hope Baptist Choir repertoire. Simple melody, familiar words. The room went still, not just quieter, still. The way rooms go still when something unexpected happens that demands attention. Whitney sang for maybe 45 seconds, not long. Not a performance, just a fragment, a verse and a chorus. Her voice in that backstage dressing room, without microphone, without accompaniment, without anything to hide behind. When she stopped, she looked at Ella. Ella was quiet for a moment. Her expression showed something that Whitney would later describe as recognition, not surprise exactly, but the look of someone who's encountered something they've been waiting to encounter. Then Ella spoke, 7 words. "That voice cannot be taught. Protect it." Whitney stared at her. Ella continued, her voice conversational, as if she were simply stating facts. "You have something that most singers spend their entire careers trying to find and never do. It's already there. Your job isn't to develop it, it's to not ruin it. Protect it from people who will want to change it. Protect it from being used up too quickly. Protect it from the industry that will want to manufacture it into something commercial and lose what makes it special." She paused, then more quietly, "Listen to your mother. She knows voices, and she knows this business. If she tells you something is wrong, it's wrong. Don't let success make you stop listening to her." Whitney was silent. She was 15 years old, and one of the greatest vocalists who had ever lived had just told her she had something extraordinary and that her primary responsibility was to protect it. Cissy Houston, standing nearby, had tears in her eyes. She was a professional who'd been in music for decades and prided herself on composure. But hearing Ella Fitzgerald describe her daughter's voice in those terms, hearing someone she deeply respected confirm what she'd been hearing and hoping and quietly worrying about, broke through her professionalism. "Thank you," Cissy said softly. Ella looked at her. "You raised her right. Keep doing that." The interaction lasted perhaps 10 minutes total. Not a long lesson, not a formal mentorship. Just a brief encounter between a 60-year-old legend and a 15-year-old girl in a backstage dressing room in Newark, New Jersey, but the encounter planted something. Whitney went home that night and didn't sleep. She kept hearing Ella's voice. "That voice cannot be taught. Protect it." She turned the words over and over. What did it mean to protect a voice? She understood the practical elements. Don't strain it, don't oversing, take care of your health. Her mother had already been teaching her these things, but Ella hadn't been talking just about the physical instrument. She'd been talking about something more fragile, the quality that made the voice special, the thing that couldn't be manufactured or replicated, identity, authenticity, the thing that made it uniquely hers. Whitney was 15 and she didn't fully understand this yet, but she stored it the way you store something you know will matter later even if you can't fully articulate why yet. In the years that followed, as Whitney's career developed, singing in New Hope Baptist Church, working as a background vocalist with her mother, gradually attracting the attention of industry figures who saw something remarkable in this teenage girl, she carried Ella's words like a compass. When Whitney was 17, a record executive approached Cissy after seeing Whitney perform. He wanted to sign Whitney immediately. "She's ready now," he said. "We can have her recording tomorrow." Cissy asked Whitney what she thought. Whitney heard Ella's voice. "Protect it from people who will want to change it. Protect it from being used up too quickly." "Not yet," Whitney said. The executive was surprised. Most teenagers with their first serious industry attention couldn't sign fast enough. "Why not yet?" "Because I'm not ready yet," Whitney said simply. She kept developing, kept working with her mother, kept singing in church, where the only audience was God and a congregation that didn't care about commercial success, where you sang because the singing mattered and not because anyone was evaluating your marketability. When Clive Davis of Arista Records eventually signed Whitney in 1983, when she was 19 and genuinely ready, the deal was structured with unusual care for a debut artist. Strong artistic input, quality production, the sense that this was about building something lasting rather than manufacturing a quick commercial product. Later, people would analyze why Whitney's career launched so differently from other young artists, why her debut generated something that felt substantial rather than disposable. There were many factors: Clive Davis's vision, the quality of the material, Whitney's own extraordinary talent. But there was also something harder to quantify: a young woman who had been told by someone she deeply respected that she had something precious and fragile, and who had decided years before her first album that protecting it mattered more than any single opportunity. When producers in the early days of her career suggested she change her approach, she heard Ella: protect it from the industry that will want to manufacture it. When executives pushed her toward sounds that felt inauthentic, she pushed back. Not always successfully. She was 20 years old, they were powerful industry veterans, and the pressure was enormous. But she pushed back. When she recorded Greatest Love of All, a song about finding strength within yourself, she understood what the lyric was actually saying because Ella had told her. Version of it years before in a backstage dressing room when she was 15 and terrified. The learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Protect what's genuinely yours. Don't let the world convince you it belongs to them. In 1985, when Whitney's debut album sold millions of copies and she became one of the fastest rising stars in the music industry, journalists asked her what was different about her approach. What separated her from other young artists who'd come before her? Whitney thought carefully before answering. Someone told me early, she said, that what I had was something that couldn't be manufactured, that my job wasn't to develop it, it was not to ruin it. She paused. I've been trying to honor that. She didn't name Ella in that interview. The backstage conversation in Newark was private, and Whitney was protective of private things, but she knew where that guidance had come from. It lived in her, the way some conversations live in you forever regardless of how old you get or how much changes around you. In 1994, at the Grammy Awards, Whitney Houston was honored with a Legend Award, a rare recognition reserved for extraordinary and enduring achievement. She was 30 years old. The award acknowledged what had happened in less than a decade: multiple Grammy wins, the best-selling debut album by a solo artist at that time, a voice that had become one of the defining sounds of the era. In her acceptance speech, Whitney talked about the people who had shaped her. She mentioned her mother with the particular depth of someone acknowledging a debt that could never fully be repaid. She mentioned the gospel tradition. She mentioned New Hope Baptist Church. And then she paused and she mentioned Ella Fitzgerald. Miss Fitzgerald told me once, Whitney said, her voice quieter now than the polished instrument she just used to accept an award, that my voice couldn't be taught and I should protect it. Another pause, the kind that means you're trying not to cry. I've been trying to do that ever since, some days better than others. She looked into the camera, but I've been trying. Backstage after the ceremony, reporters pressed for more. What did Ella Fitzgerald mean to you specifically? She was what serious looked like, Whitney said. You know how you can see someone perform and you just know that this is what it's supposed to look like? That's Ella. I was 15 years old watching her perform and I thought, that's what music is supposed to do to people. That's the standard. And she told you to protect your voice. She told me my voice couldn't be taught and to protect it. 7 words. I've spent 17 years thinking about those 7 words. Ella Fitzgerald, 76 years old in 1994 and living with significantly diminished health, watched the Grammy broadcast from her Beverly Hills home. The diabetes that had defined the last 2 decades of her life had advanced. She'd had bypass surgery. Her public performing life was essentially over. When Whitney mentioned her, everyone in the room with Ella turned to look at her. Ella watched Whitney speak. She watched the younger woman's face, the poise, the emotion, the way she held herself at the podium. She watched the audience respond. When Whitney finished the section about her, Ella was quiet for a long moment, her manager sitting nearby would later recall. She didn't say much, she just watched. Then very quietly she said, "Good," she remembered. "Good," she remembered. 3 words in response to the memory of 7, not effusive, not dramatic, just quiet satisfaction that something past had been received and honored. 2 years later, in 1996, Ella Fitzgerald died at her home in Beverly Hills at the age of 78. Her health had been declining for years, and the end, when it came, was not unexpected. Whitney Houston, by then one of the most successful recording artists in the world, was asked about Ella's passing in an interview. She was the standard, Whitney said, not just for singing, for what it means to have a voice and take care of it. Take it seriously, treat it as a gift rather than a commodity. Did she affect your career? Directly, the interviewer asked. She affected everything, Whitney said. One conversation backstage when I was 15, 7 words, and I've been thinking about those words ever since. The interviewer asked what the words were. Whitney paused, then said them. That voice cannot be taught. Protect it. Then, I'm still trying to live up to that. The conversation in the Newark dressing room in 1978 was private. No cameras, no journalists, no public record beyond the memories of those present. It happened the way real things often happen, quietly, without ceremony, between people who were simply being who they were. Ella Fitzgerald being honest about what she heard. Cissy Houston trusting the right moment. Whitney Houston being 15 and terrified and listening. 7 words that crossed generations, that carried what Ella had learned in 50 years of performing and distilled it into the simplest, most essential advice she could give. That voice cannot be taught. Protect it. 2 legends, 1 sentence. A career shaped by 7 words heard in a backstage dressing room in Newark, New Jersey, when Whitney Houston was 15 years old and Ella Fitzgerald was 60, and the torch was passed not with ceremony but with honesty. That's how legacies transmit themselves. Not through formal institutions or official ceremonies, through a moment, a voice, 7 words. That voice cannot be taught. Protect it.